Hello, everyone. Good to see you all. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let me put on the screen the prayers and let's see, where was that? Oops, get this thing out of the way, this menu at the top. Okay, there we go. So again, we'll start with the praise to Shakyamuni Buddha that we'll just do one time together. To the founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. With a short mandala offering. This ground, anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Then Refuge in Bodhicitta in English, and then twice more in the Tibet. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Sangye chodang soki choknam la jangchu bardu dakni kyapsu chi daki chunyen gipe sonam gi dola penchir sangye drupar shon sangye chodang soki choknam la Jangchu Bardu Dakni Kyapsu Chi Daki Chunyen Gipe Sanam Gi Dola Penchir Sangye Drupar Shon. Let's do a short meditation. So just spend the first few minutes focusing on the breath, trying to calm the mind a bit, letting go of whatever distractions you might have from the day. And then I'll come in a few minutes and lead you in setting motivation together. Okay, so we'll just begin the meditation now. So now let's set our motivation for tonight's class. And we've been examining in these verses the way in which the self-cherishing mind, especially, takes over, causes us to engage in certain behaviors, to have certain attitudes and thoughts. And it's important that we examine that when that mind arises, it's convinced that this is the way to happiness, that by being focused on our own welfare, that we are going to be assured of having what we need, what we want, the happiness we seek. This mind is erroneous. It doesn't work that way. The more that we follow this self-centeredness, the more that we lose. And moreover, others lose as well, because we cannot be a benefit to them if we are guided by this very narrow mind of self-cherishing. So when we follow that mind, it's a lose-lose situation. We're believing that we're going to win, that somehow we're going to get what we seek. But it actually becomes more distant. We cannot possibly achieve our own happiness by following that mind. And certainly, again, others will lose as well, because we can't do anything for their benefit as long as we are guided by that mind. If, on the other hand, we adopt the mind of cherishing others, well, our ego might think, well, this is going to be a lose for us and a win for others. Yes, they'll get what they want, what they need, because we'll be dedicated to their welfare. But what's in it for me? This is the mind of self-cherishing still coming into the conversation, somehow believing that we're going to miss out if we dedicate our lives fully to the welfare of other beings. But again, it doesn't work that way either. Not only do others win, but we win. We are able to achieve our greatest potential, to achieve the state of Buddhahood, the complete fulfillment of all that we seek. Our own well-being is most certainly assured if we follow the mind of bodhicitta, if we develop the mind that truly cherishes others to that degree. So it's our choice. Do we want to continue in a lose-lose situation, or do we want to adopt the win-win attitude of bodhicitta? As His Holiness says, this is the way of being wisely selfish, of recognizing that our own welfare is going to be accomplished when we are dedicated to the welfare of other beings. So cultivate that motivation of bodhicitta, that strong desire to be of greatest benefit to others, with the recognition that your own welfare is assured once you do that, that you will find the happiness of this life, the happiness of future lives, the happiness of liberation, the happiness of enlightenment, and you can be fully dedicated to bringing all beings to that same happiness. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes fully, and we'll begin. I see the shadow of a dog tail in the wall behind you, Bill. That was kind of interesting. Okay.
The whole body's there, actually.
Pardon?
The whole body is actually attached to it.
Yeah, it's just not just the tail.
She wouldn't miss another teaching. She loves it.
Okay, good. So let's get back into where we were. Again, we're in this rather lengthy section of the text where we're looking at these verses that have the first two lines indicating some sort of habitual way that we are behaving under the influence of the mind of self-cherishing, as well as the mind of self-grasping. Remember, these twin demons are showing up frequently together. And then what this last two lines that are the refrain about Yamantaka ranting and raving, kind of completely demolishing those twin demons. So, by the way, before we go too far, I do want to mention I've noticed that my internet signal's at about half of what it normally is. So I hope it's coming through okay. If you do see some problems, I can certainly try rebooting it, but that would mean I'd have to stop teaching for a short while and come back in. But hopefully it'll continue to function all right. I've got to figure out what's going on with it. But so let's go ahead and get back into our text. Actually, I want to go to the slides first. Mentioned to you sometimes I'm picking up passages from various books, and one of them is for tonight from Good Karma. Venerable Chodron says, in all these verses, Dharmarakshita publicly exposes our faults. He does this not to pick on us, embarrass us, or make us defensive and miserable. He does this so we can become convinced of the defects of ignorance and self-centeredness and work to eliminate them from our mind stream. His is a kind of tough love, a form of compassion used to help us change. He's kind of like rubbing our nose in these various behaviors with each of these verses. And again, some of them we may see are more common to us than others are, but nonetheless, we could fall into any of these behaviors under the control of these twin demons. So let's go on to then verse 75. Last week we made it up through verse 674. And here Dharmarakshita says, oh, our fortitude in meditation is little, but our clairvoyance is sharp. Of course, this is not a real clairvoyance. It's a faux clairvoyance that we are pretending to have, even though we haven't even engaged in the meditation that leads to having such clairvoyance. Then, not having begun the path, our feet senselessly race about. And we haven't even entered into the Mahayana path. We don't yet have spontaneous bodhicitta, but nonetheless, we kind of go about doing all these things as if we were some great bodhisattva and what have you. Then I'll just say again the refrain for this verse, and we won't say it for the remaining ones. Rant and rave on the head of the conception that brings about our ruin. To the hearts of the enemy, the self, again, self-grasping, and the executioner, self-cherishing, Maraya, kill, death to them. Again, not death in a sort of violent, angry way, but in recognizing that is the enemy. That's who we are actually trying to defeat in order to have the peace in our minds that we seek. So let's take a look at this commentary from Geshe Japa Gyatso. He says, although it is necessary to practice for a long time in order to completely pure clairvoyance and so forth to arise, because you can develop clairvoyances through developing, again, what are called the concentrations, which go beyond just calm abiding, having that mind, and help us to have even deeper states of meditation. But he says, even though that's necessary, we have little fortitude in meditation, and that we are unable to practice meditation for just 1 year or even just 1 month. Even though this is the case, in order to trick others, we boastfully impute sharp clairvoyance to ourselves. That is, we tell various lies about ourselves to others. And again, this is a fault that we may fall into, is professing various skills and abilities that arise through deep practice that we don't possess. It says, alternatively, when various visions of meditative experience arise in our mind under the power of interferers, such as Maras and the like, as much as we can, we tell the extent of their arisal to others. Again, giving all these various meditative experiences as if they were something really wonderful, when in fact, again, they could be just things that are coming up under the power of interferers. There's no genuine meditative experiences that we're having. So it says, Lama Dharmarakshita, through also being thoroughly amazed by people who do this, says, oh, right at the beginning of that verse, oh, how kind of, I don't know what the word would be that followed it. Oh, how discouraging that people do this, that people pretend to have various qualities and abilities that they haven't even put the energy into creating the meditation that would cause those abilities to arise. Then the second line, line B, in addition, Geshe-la says, if we run about, although it is necessary to go to the Buddha ground, we will not begin the path to it, even in the slightest. Instead, senselessly, our feet, which are able to reach everywhere, including India, China, and so on, speedily race about. So we just kind of go about our business of kind of running around and doing all sorts of things, and don't even bring ourselves to enter the path, much less, culminate the path in terms of developing Buddhahood. It's interesting, Venerable Children in her book talks about kind of another meditative skill that is arrived at through deeper meditation practices in reference to that second verse. It has a slightly different translation with this idea of our feet senselessly racing about. There's another skill or ability that can come to you through developing the concentrations, which is called the magical legs of, I think it's just called the 4 magical legs. Anyway, it says here in her commentary, similarly, although we have not even reached the edge of the bodhisattva path, which again is feeling spontaneous bodhicitta when encountering any sentient being, it is ludicrous to think we've attained these supernormal powers of fast legs that allows someone to travel quickly through the sky. And you may have heard of these sorts of accomplishments where people can walk through walls and appear almost immediately in another part of a country or something. They have these fast legs or ability to fly or whatever the case might be. Some of these do arise through deeper concentration, but to pretend that we have them, to think we've attained them when we haven't done that, is ludicrous. Even if we attain such supernormal powers by cultivating concentration without great compassion, there is the risk that we would misuse such powers for egotistical means, harming ourselves or others in the process. Again, because of our self-cherishing mind, even that racing about with these fast legs would be abuse. It would be, not using them in a correct way to benefit others. With all these various powers that people are able to develop on the path, bodhisattvas and what have you, they do so with the intention of benefiting others from that. There are, again, I won't go through the list of the six clairvoyances. I'm sorry, there are 6 clairvoyances and what are called the 5 eyes, which are these ability to cognize various phenomena. But the 6 clairvoyances include things like knowing past and future lives, knowing the minds of others. You're not yet at the stage of Buddhahood, obviously, when you have these skills and abilities, because you can't know everything simultaneously and know all facets and features of the objects that you're observing. But if you have the ability to know other people's minds, you don't use it, to kind of become a psychic and start going all over the place and raising money for yourself so you can have a nice home somewhere by telling people's fortunes and reading their minds and what have you. You do it so that you can benefit others. If you have that ability to know what's going on in other people's minds, you're going to be much more skillful in being able to guide them, to give them the Dharma medicine that they need. So again, bodhisattvas, even when they have these abilities, clairvoyances and so on, they don't use them in ways that are about their arrogance of having these and for worldly purposes. They use them entirely on the path. So again, if we were to use these various things without having done the prerequisite work or profess to have them without even having them because we haven't done the meditative levels of ability to create those, well, then it's ridiculous. Again, our self-cherishing mind is leading us way astray. So let's go back to the commentary and go on to the next verse. Whoops, sorry, I went a little too quickly. I had fast fingers. Okay, so the verse says, verse 76, when someone tells us something beneficial, we consider them with animosity to be an enemy. So you might have somebody who means really well, and they're giving you some beneficial advice, something they've noticed about you that they think you could work on that would be of use to you and improving your qualities and so on. But you have animosity towards them. You think that they're the enemy because they're pointing out your faults or something. Then on the other hand, when someone tricks and cheats us, we consider that heartless one to be kind. Well, this is the exact opposite, right? We have somebody who's actually deceiving us, and maybe they're even saying really nice things about us, and they're only doing it out of ulterior motive or, whatever is going on for them, but there's no genuine friendship there. They're just, stroking our ego. Well, we consider that heartless one to be kind. By the way, it was actually in His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teachings on the Wheel of Sharp Weapons, which I've watched many years ago. I haven't watched it recently. At this point, he said that we start getting into these sort of character flaws or faulty personality traits, because we're seeing here in these first 2 lines, this would be an error in our behavior, right? To suddenly be kind of averse to people who are giving us genuine good advice. Or on the other hand, people who are stroking our ego and saying all sorts of wonderful things about us, but they have some deception involved in that. They're really out to get something from us. And we consider them to be our best friends because they're saying all these wonderful things about us. So we have to be careful in terms of avoiding this sort of flaw in our character, as well as what we're going to see coming up. They're all in that category of like looking at things, the way that self-cherishing manifests in terms of our, again, kind of personality traits, the things that we have that can be real obstacles on the path. So let's go back to the commentary then from Geshe-la. He says, nowadays, when our lamas, parents, and others, out of affection, mention our faults, that is, express them straightforwardly with a benevolent mind, most of us with animosity consider them to definitely be an enemy, thinking, I will tell you one of your own faults, right? You just pointed out my faults. Well, that's nothing. Let me tell you about what you got going on that I've noticed about you. That it's that kind of tit for tat mentality that's not very helpful. We should simply take in what they've said and analyze it and see if there's some truth to it. And if it's actually good advice, well, we should be grateful, not have animosity. Then when others, motivated by dissimulation and deceit, act to trick and cheat us, saying everything you do is sure to be just right, we consider them to be kind through thinking he is definitely someone who benefits me, right? This is somebody who's actually my friend, a good companion to have, is this person who talks about all the wonderful qualities I have. Those who trick us like that are called heartless ones. They do not recognize the difference between the beneficial and the harmful. And of course, we at that time are not seeing the beneficial and the harmful. We are not seeing the fact that the people who are kind of giving us this advice, that they really have a good heart. They're really trying to benefit us. And the people who are saying good things about us with that deceptive mind are actually doing the opposite. They're wanting something from us and so on. So, I don't think I have any slides on that, but let me check just to make sure. Oh, sorry, there's one more little bit for that about the previous one, verse 75. This verse makes fun of people who do not have the right priorities on the spiritual path and put on airs of having these supernormal powers. Again, that was the verse we just had. There was nothing more I wanted to share there, but let's go on to verse 77 then and read it from here. We tell the confidential talk that depends on being family to enemies. So someone is treating you like your family and sharing with you all of their confidential things about themselves. But we end up sharing that with that person's foes, with the people who are opposed to them. Then on the other hand, when we have close friends, we unabashedly steal their hearts and minds. We do things once more that betray that closeness. So this whole verse is really about trust and about how we frequently, through the self-cherishing mind, don't keep that trust and confidence that we want to ideally have with others. When people are sharing things with us and so on, we want to make sure that we respect that and that we certainly don't do anything to harm them by sharing that information with people who could really get the better of them by knowing that information. That would be really horrible to do, right? Because that actually creates more harm and suffering for the person who in confidence shared things with us. So let's take a look at what Geshe-la says in terms of his commentary. And then there's a little bit more on this one that I want to share from, I think, from Good Karma, again, from Venerable Chodron's work. For example, when someone who is considered by a lord or the like to be the best member of the household among all his servants tells all the Lord's secrets, that person who the person was entrusting with their confidences, that servant without integrity passes on all this confidential talk to the side of the enemy, or to anyone who again could, make use of it in a malevolent way, doing something to harm that person because they now have information on them about something that they did. In addition, when we have a friend with whom we are close, that is when we befriend someone, through taking them into our heart, by examining their faults as much as we can without being ashamed and embarrassed, in the end, we cheat them, right? Because this is the thing is, when you get very close to people, you start learning things about them that could be used as a tool to get back at them or to get something from them, to out of our self-centered mind to try to achieve what we wish from them. It says here, acting, the final sentence, acting like this is known even in the world as stealing someone's heart and mind. So again, having seen that the one who makes us act like this is also our self-cherishing, we say that, second 2 lines, rant and rave and so on. Let me cue this up for the next one and go back to the slides. Yeah, there were some interesting things that Venerable Chodron shared on this. It says here, betraying others' trust not only sparks their anger and sometimes fear, but also, well, maybe this is something that was in the text because I'm copying it over from Kindle, and somehow we got it also in there twice. Also, it makes it more difficult for them to trust others later on. When word gets out that we revealed others' confidential matters or use them for our own gain, others lose respect and trust in us as well. This is the problem. When we actually betray another person's confidence, we think that they're going to lose from it, but we lose as well because people stop confiding in us and trusting us. You create that type of karma. As she says here, this will continue into future lives, making it difficult for us to trust others and difficult for them to trust us. Trust is an essential ingredient in fulfilling relationships, which our behavior will then deprive us of. The karma of betraying the trust of others is that our own trust will be betrayed, and we will find it difficult to trust others and for them to trust us again. In a reversal of the situation, she says, when somebody tells me something about another person's confidential business, unless it is an extraordinary situation that calls for this information to be revealed, I know that I shouldn't trust that person. Why? They're likely to blab what I say in confidence. Similarly, if I see someone mistreat someone else, I stay clear of that person, knowing that if I become friendly with her, there's a high likelihood that she will treat me the same way. So again, I think it makes some sense, right, to say that if people are coming to you and they're saying, oh, you wouldn't believe what so-and-so confided in me, and I'll confide in you, but please don't tell anybody else. Well, that's not real confidence then, right? That's not a proper trust. If that person trusted you to keep that confidence, then you're sharing it with somebody else is breaking that confidence, even if you say, but don't tell anyone else. Because what's to stop that person from saying, oh, well, I was told not to say this to anyone, so I'm going to tell it to you, but please don't tell anyone else. Before you know it, everyone in town knows this because nobody's really kept the confidence that was part of the initial agreement. So again, we have to be very careful about how we treat what others say to us, that if they are confiding in us in regard to something, that's something you don't convey to anyone else, again, unless there's some extenuating circumstances where you absolutely have to share that. And if you have people who are saying that to you, it's a good clue to not trust them with anything that's confidential, because they could use that same logic and do that to others. Again, the main target we're always looking at here is ourselves, not to be picking out this in other people. Oh, I know somebody like that who, doesn't do that. Look at ourselves and say, have I done that? Have I betrayed other people's trust in me? Okay. So again, I don't think that I have anything more in terms of sharing on that. Well, maybe I do. Oh no, that's right. That's the next one. Okay. This is kind of interesting. We're back to we're dealing with annoyance here. Our annoyance is high and our conceptualizations are coarser than everyone's. This word conceptualizations, in the translation that Venerable Chodron has that goes through Thupten Jinpa, the term paranoia is there. So again, we have to kind of look at this word. It's that word namdak that we actually saw back in verse 34. But the idea is that we get annoyed really easily by other people, and the conceptualizations that we have about others in terms of our superstitions about them and so on are coarser than everyone else's. And secondly, we are difficult to get along with, and our bad temper constantly manifests. In other words, we're in a bad mood and have a bad temper. That people don't even want to necessarily associate with us because they're afraid that we're going to get upset, angry, what have you. Again, this is not a good place to be. This is all coming from our self-cherishing mind. Let's go ahead and read what Venerable Chodron says on this. It says the Tibetan word that is translated as paranoia, again in brackets I put in there, or conceptualizations in that first line of this verse, is namdok. We encountered this word previously in verse 34. It means a preconception or superstitious thought that makes up stories. And we got a lot of that goes on in our minds. If we start paying attention, we can see how frequently we fall into that. Even when somebody just says something to us, we start making up a whole story about what's happening. You know, why are they saying that to me? Is it some fault that they're seeing in me or whatever? Or do they have an ulterior motive? Or, you know, this is kind of the way that our minds work. So here, our mind is fabricating the story. These people are gossiping behind my back, or they're plotting to do something against me. We become unnecessarily suspicious, anxious, and fearful. So again, what's happening in this one is that we're because our annoyance is so high, because we're kind of ready to be triggered by almost anything, we start making up a lot of stories when people are just going about their business, perhaps. There's nothing really happening, but we think that somehow we're the butt of all of their actions that are, kind of what they're about, what they're plotting, and so on. Sometimes the suffering caused by anxiety and fear is greater than the suffering of the situation actually occurring. This is often true, right? We put ourselves through so many mental hoops and ruminations and what have you, and the suffering of that is much greater than what's actually happening, right? We need to be able to discern, she says, when namtak arises. Familiarizing ourselves with what self-centeredness and compassion feel like in our mind and body is helpful, because these feel very different. The self-centeredness, the self-cherishing that is the enemy, and the compassion that is the other-focused response to suffering that we see around us. To do this, we practice being aware of the tone of our mind or the flavor or texture of various thoughts. You can kind of like begin to clue into what's happening in our minds. What is the flavor of this chain of thought that I'm going off on? Is it leading me down that hole of superstition, paranoia, conceptualization, rumination? Or is it actually something that is more helpful, more beneficial, a mind that is looking at the other person through the lens of compassion and concern? She says we also pay attention to our body. Is there a part of our body that tightens or relaxes slightly when a particular emotion manifests in our mind? You know, if we start paying attention to what's going on physically, because often there's a connection between the thoughts that we're having and what's going on with the body. The sort of tightness that can occur when we do have that tightening of the mind and going off in certain directions, or the relaxation when we actually have our heart more open towards the other person. Cultivating this kind of emotional sensitivity, it could be called, gives us much information about ourselves. And that in turn enables us to regulate our thoughts, emotions, and actions. You know, I think that this is a really important thing, is that if we aren't kind of paying attention to all the various clues that we could be getting by simply being aware, you know, holding the awareness of what's happening in my mind, the particular thoughts that are moving in a direction, what's happening in my body as those thoughts arise. You know, the tightness that is occurring when my mind does start feeling a bit more suspicious of the people around me and what's going on. I don't know if people have some of those experiences, but again, if you do start getting clued into that, it can be like a warning system. The red light starts going off, you know, danger, danger, you're headed down a pathway that's not so good. And you know, we can spend hours sometimes ruminating over things, especially if you're in a very tense emotional situation where you do start doubting the other person and what's going on, and you start having those thoughts that start moving in particular directions. So what if they do this, and what if they do that, and da 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 da, and before you know it, you know, you've built up like a whole fiction. Again, that is your own conceptualizations, your own namdak. Kind of own it, but then see that there's a better way to behave. Did you want to share anything? I saw your note come up, Bill, in the chat box. Did you want to
No,
share anything?
this really reminds me, like,
Uh-huh.
there was a period maybe 8 years ago where I couldn't get a good job, and Missoula is not a very big town, and I just started to become convinced that all these people didn't like me, and that's why I couldn't get a job. It had nothing to do with like maybe there being people who are more qualified than me applying for these jobs or anything, you know. But I just created this whole, I mean, it like kind of consumed my life for a little while.
Sure.
I had to work on it. I mean, it took me a long time to kind of recognize it. And but anyway,
Yeah.
I
No,
just thought
thanks for sharing that. It's a perfect example of like this Namtak kind of getting out of control. And those sorts of patterns, sometimes we think self-cherishing is all about kind of getting me kind of the good things. Like that's the way we envision it, is like that's that mind that drives us to want the best for ourselves. But it's operating even when we're in a state like you're describing, Bill, where we're not getting what we want, where we still rotate around this strong sense of an I that we think is most important and that should be getting the job over everyone else. And why isn't it? And da 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 da. I mean, it's still the same thought patterns. It was Holiness, when he was confronted again with a lot of these kind of perilous states of mind in the West, that we have so much more self-loathing, depression, all these various things that occur. He said they're still in the same camp as that self-cherishing and that being focused on ourselves. They're just not about me getting everything delightful and wonderful for myself. It's about me kind of thinking I'm most important and then narrowly focusing on my welfare and thinking that it all revolves around me. And therefore, these thoughts of feeling dejected, feeling suspicious of other people, and so on, this all is coming from the same place. It just has a slightly different flavor than when we're kind of grabbing the biggest piece of cake for ourselves or whatever. So the mind of self-cherishing is pretty heinous. It's operating in a lot of covert ways even. And so to begin to see that, as Venerable Chodron was pointing out, to see what happens when we start going down those pathways, to us mentally, to us physically, and then trying to nip it in the bud as much as we can. Or if we see it's been going on for a while and we finally recognize it after a half hour or an hour, well, then we do what we can to stop it there, to stop it wherever you notice it. So let's look at what Geshe-la says about this. We haven't read his commentary on this verse yet. He uses this phrase, I don't know, this is kind of a strange thing. He says, it is said, his annoyance is superior to that of a Sen spirit of Tsang. These Sen spirits, these are, I don't know, it gets into a lot of this Tibetan stuff around spirits. This comes up occasionally in some of these texts. And apparently these spirits are really quite subject to kind of being annoyed and potentially even inhabiting the beings of the bodies of other beings. It says there, moreover, the annoyance of the Sen spirits of Sang, known as excellent Vajra, who enter into bodies and inflict harm for the slightest thing, is very high. Like you annoy them even in the least bit, and because they're just waiting to be annoyed, they immediately do something really malevolent towards you. Sort of possession. It sounds like. Again, I can't speak to these spirits. I don't have any experience with them. Knock on wood, but Similarly, the annoyance that with respect to others looking at us as excellent, faulty, and so on, also thinks, why is he doing that to me? That's high. We have a high annoyance, a kind of high sensitivity to like people saying something about us or doing something that we, again, as Bill's example shows, we can start going down a pathway of saying a story about ourselves and what's happening and da-da-da-da. Coarse conceptualizations, Geshe-la says, are taken to be very coarse and bad conceptualizations that do not accord with the Dharma. For instance, not being able even to bend forward due to the sole conceptualization that thinks, for example, whatever I do, will there not be a fault in this and a fault in that? So in other words, it becomes paralyzing. We can't really move in any particular direction is how I'm understanding that commentary, that we kind of think that there's something wrong, again, that can manifest as a paranoia, as a distrust around the people around us, that we can't even move in a particular direction. Whatever I do, there will be some sort of fault in doing this, doing that. So we become, again, kind of impotent by virtue of that because of the strong focus on ourselves and this kind of falling into that sort of chasm of superstition and maybe even overthinking is a good word to use here. We do a lot of overthinking in our culture. In addition, to speak to line B of this verse, we are difficult to get along with, even for those who are our friends, and our bad temper constantly manifests. If we see that this is the case for us, that we're really, kind of everybody's walking on eggshells around us because we have a temper that can just immediately flare up at the slightest thing. Yeah, this is also not a good way to be in the world, right? Because this is, again, it's all about ourselves, and everyone else then kind of feeling like they have to be very careful around our personality because of that trait. And keeping in mind that all of these verses here in this section are about ways that we can have the self-cherishing manifesting in giving us a particular flavor of how we work with others, how others see us, how we behave in response to what others are doing. And if we have that type of bad temper where it seems like we're in a bad mood constantly and no one even wants to talk to us, say anything to us, disturb us because they're afraid of the wrath of dawn or whatever, well, then we have to be very careful, right? And the people around us, of course, feeling they have to be very careful, but we have to change that. We have to become more receptive. I mean, this would be totally antithetical, again, to the bodhisattva path of compassion for others, because we don't want to create those sorts of blocks to others, that others don't feel that they can even come to us because they're afraid that we're going to bite their head off or something. And I don't think that any of you have that feeling about me necessarily, but I'm not patting myself on the back about that. I'm just saying, I don't think this is something that you're necessarily seeing with me, but perhaps we have seen this with other people. And again, it's whenever we see it in another person, any of these verses, remember to try to see it as a mirror that's shining back on you and saying, first of all, the reason why you can recognize it in others is because you've got some inkling of it in yourself. Maybe it doesn't happen as often or isn't quite as prevalent, but that is a mirror to be held up to say, yes, and you need to be attentive to that as well. You need to be watchful for that, because anytime that behavior starts to manifest, where is it coming from? Again, especially our self-cherishing, and it's not going to lead to any good end or result. It's only going to compound our suffering and the suffering of others. So let's jump back to the slides. We have here in terms of verse 79 that's on the screen. When appealed to, we turn away without listening and inflict harm. There's different ways of interpreting this. When appealed to, the way that Geshe-la interprets it is like when people give you particular teachings and things that are meant for your benefit, that we turn away from that without listening, and might even inflict harm back on the person who has made that appeal to us to engage in particular behavior that would be to our benefit. But this also can be seen by Venerable Chodron as like when others come to us seeking help. So when we have that appeal of someone saying, I really could use your help with something, but we turn away without even listening to them. And we might even say something negative to them like, well, go take care of yourself. I'm not your father. I'm not your, your parent. You can deal with that yourself. Well, that's not, again, a bodhisattva attitude. That's coming from our own self-cherishing. Secondly, line B, when bowed to, we do not bow in return, but from a distance look for an argument. So again, when someone pays respect to us, we don't pay respect back to them, but rather we look for an argument. We look for some sort of dispute with that person. Again, I don't have any additional stuff to share in the slides. I'm not doing that much as much tonight. I'm trying to get through some of these verses, though I do have a few things to share on some of the later ones. Let's go to verse 79, commentary. Sorry, whoops, all this kind of stuff happening here. I keep moving around this little menu so I can see the screen, but then, okay, so verse 79a, when someone appeals to us, we do not listen, means, for example, that when our lamas and others appeal to us to practice the Dharma, saying, you should do this and that Dharma, we turn away without listening to them, and by means of not doing it and doing something else instead, we inflict harm on them. Kind of, again, go against their advice. And if it's a lama in particular, someone who we have a commitment to follow, if there's no good reason for not following their advice, if we're only doing it out of our self-centeredness, well, then we are really breaking that kind of commitment that we have to the lamas and so on. That would be, again, totally antithetical to the role that we want to ideally play in response to them, and them, as guides for us. Line B, when other people bow toward us, we should bow back to them. However, in addition to not doing that, from a distance, we look for an argument with them. That is, in a roundabout way, we look for an argument such that in the end, we denounce our lamas and leaders and so forth, or anyone who pays us respect. And we can have people in our lives who respect us greatly. And if we don't kind of respond with a sort of reciprocating respect, well, then again, we're breaking that relationship. We should be, again, holding others in that light as much as possible. And there's that old phrase of kind of like everyone you meet, you have something to learn from if you really just spend enough time and attention and really see them through the lens of curiosity and kind of wanting to see what they're about. Everyone can teach us something. If they're annoying people, difficult people, well, there's a lot to be learned there then, right? How to work with that, how to change our own minds. Even if they're friendly, very endearing people, well, maybe we can learn some good qualities that they have that we are maybe not as good at doing as what they are. And yeah, all people have something that they can share with us. It's all lessons if we can see it in that lens. So we can have some bowing to other people. I know in the Zen tradition, they do a lot of bowing, right? Always bowing to each other, to kind of the Buddha nature and others and what have you, is what I understand. But that's the idea we want to have, is whoever comes into our lives, if they're showing us some respect, be sure to be reciprocal with that and to really not break that, especially by trying to get into an argument with them, trying to figure out some way to get under their skin or something. I'm not sure why we would do that in response to their bowing to us, but nonetheless, it's just getting at how we can maybe get totally out of control with this mind of self-cherishing that just doesn't really see the benefit of treating others in a more respectful way. Oops, I think I went a little too far. Okay, so we're getting a lot of these that have a similar flavor. So again, I won't spend maybe quite as much time on them. Verse 80, we are up to. Yes, we do not like advice, right? Who likes receiving advice? Maybe again, some people are better at it than others. And it is always difficult for us to go along with it, right? We always hold tightly to the many things that offend us. We have that kind of like a dog with a bone. We don't want to let go of something that somebody said that was not so kind, that offended us. And maybe they didn't even intend it to be unkind, but we took it that way. So let's go on to what Geshe-la says about this. Like staying at the foot of craggy boulders, for example, we do not like to be given advice by other people, whatever their behavior is like. That is always difficult for us to go along with. Not sure what this at the foot of craggy boulders is all about. I get the idea in his commentary on this. He says, just that it is difficult to stay at the foot of a pile of craggy boulders. It's just kind of getting at the difficulty of that type of a physical situation. Also, when we're receiving advice from others, regardless of how they are behaving and giving us that, it's difficult for us to go along with that advice. Most people don't really like to be told what to do or how they should be doing something better, unless they're actively seeking that advice. It's different when you go to somebody who may be able to give you something benefit and you ask for it. But when somebody just starts giving you advice, frequently you're like, well, why are you doing this? What's your relationship to me? Or are you sure that? And of course, it becomes very hard for us to follow the advice if we're questioning the motives or the integrity of that person. Then for line B, it says, in addition, at times, a mere tiny condition offends our mind. And not only are we offended, we also hold tightly to the bad thought in order to not forget it. And of course, I might add to this, and to not forgive it. We can be offended pretty easily by people because of this, sort of sensitive skin, the thin skin that we often have. And so if we hold on to that, again, just make that kind of the only thing we remember about that person. Oh yeah, I remember they said something blah, blah, blah about, about me or whatever. I had a friend who was like that, who kept bringing up like this one incident that happened with someone else. I would go back to it so frequently that I was like, I think you need to let that go now. How many years have you been holding on to that? People don't forget, and they don't ever have a sort of spirit of forgiveness, of like understanding, well, that was how that person was in that particular moment at that particular time. But that may not be who that person is now. That may not even been reflective of the whole person in that moment. I often point out to people, how would you like to be remembered in the world for your worst moment? And think about the time when you were at your worst. I know it's painful, but be honest with yourself and think about when you were at your worst. would you really want people to hold on to that as like the view of you? The view of Don is when he was blah, 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 blah. And that's the totality of Don. That is the essence of Don. That is who Don is inside and out, all the way through. We know that we're not that, right? Whatever worst moment each of us has, we're much more than that, much better than that. We would not want to define ourselves by that moment. Hopefully, we're not doing that to ourselves and thinking that that's who we really are, is that horrible person at that time who, under the influence of various causes and conditions, did blah, 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 blah. But rather we see that we're much more than that. And that's the view we should have with others as well, who don't hold on to these things. And kind of, that's again our mind of self-cherishing. It's not wanting to let go of things. It's thinking, oh, you hurt me. Look at all the damage you did to me. Right? Okay, 81. Our high-handedness is great. High-handedness can also be seen, Venerable Children's translation, again from Tipton Chimpa, says, we crave for high status, kind of like for people to think well of us, our high-handedness. And we consider the holy to be enemies, those who hold some sort of more superior position. Due to our attachment being great, we eagerly grasp at the young. This is a totally different, maybe perhaps somewhat unrelated thing. The idea that we can even have sort of lustful thoughts due to our attachment arising towards whatever objects of lust that we might have. In this case, it's pointed out as sort of grasping at the youthful young people, that we may even abuse, which of course would be a horrible thing. But perhaps if we've done that, again, don't put yourself through the ringer, but understand what motivated you at that time and try to do the best to overcome some other motivations. So Geshe-la comments on these two lines, verse A, first by saying, when others study, practice meditation, explain the Dharma, and so forth, without rejoicing and motivated by a high-handed attitude. In other words, it's all about me. It's all about me being thought of well. It's a sort of haughty, very prideful, arrogant attitude. We mention and talk about their faults. So again, when we are motivated by that, even if others are practicing genuinely, even if their Dharma practice is really quite sincere and pure, we might not rejoice in their actions at all, but instead of thinking of ourselves in this higher light with our own, pride and so on, all we can do is talk about their faults. While that phrase of, without rejoicing is mentioned, I do want to mention the practice of rejoicing, because some of the teachers do emphasize this here. Whenever we see anything good about anybody else, even if they're what we might consider the most despicable person in our world or in our circle or what have you, we still should rejoice, because they didn't get those good things without having created the causes for them. And as we've seen throughout this whole text, the causes for having good things in our lives is the constructive, wholesome, positive karma we've created. Of course, having suffering and difficulties, it's from our own negative karma, our unwholesome karma. This is the way it works all the time. So even if we see people who maybe we don't like the things that they're tweeting or the things that they're doing in the world, they might have still good fortune in terms of the riches they have or the social life that they have or whatever. All those things that are positive and good and enjoyed by them are actually arising through the force of their good karma in the past. We may not be, and it's good not to rejoice, certainly, in the misbehavior that they are doing in spite of having all those wonderful results. That would be something, again, we can separate that out and say that's an action that we would not want to condone. But we can rejoice in all the good karma that led them to have those things, to have those qualities and possessions and whatever else might be in their life. Rejoicing is a really wonderful antidote to any of this kind of thinking that we're better than others, or having an envy or jealousy of others who appear to be much better than we are. It's a wonderful way to kind of get us back to that place of recognizing what's most important, which is that we continue to follow a path of virtue and avoid non-virtue. And when we see others have done that in the past, regardless of what they're doing right now, we can rejoice in that. But yes, we can still maybe find some way of trying to help them to correct the behavior that isn't in line with that. Even though they've got a lot of money, they're not being very generous, for example. Well, if we have a skillful way and we know them well enough to encourage them to engage in that type of behavior of being more generous, well, then that would be an antidote to that to help them to continue to have those sorts of results. But the idea here is that instead of that, we kind of badmouth them. We think about all their faults and focus on them and don't do anything to really rejoice and acknowledge the good qualities and results that they have. Without respecting holy beings, this is the next part of that line A, we consider them to be our enemies and disparage them. Holy beings who are in our lives and with a greater capacity for spiritual practice and who have nothing but good intentions towards us. We have to consider, why do we consider them to be our enemies and disparage them? It must be, again, our self-cherishing mind. Due to our attachment being great, we eagerly grasp at the young, at women, and so forth. This is line B. Again, this is pointing to this particular fault of having lustful thoughts and perhaps even, again, actions or behavior towards those who are young or more attractive or more desirable. We have to be very careful about that type of behavior. Obviously, there's so much of it in our world. We had all of that not so long ago of the Me Too movement that became very large in the United States, at least, though I think it even had a worldwide kind of impact to see the ways in which people can be abused sexually, emotionally, physically by other people who are going to, again, be driven by these particular base emotions and going after people regardless of the appropriateness or inappropriateness of that particular behavior. So again, we have to be very kind of sensitive to that and see what our own things are. This one's very much geared at that idea of lust, but I think we have to look at anything. Again, are we prone to take advantage of other people in our lives, maybe not with a lustful mind, but with a mind that wants to just simply have the benefits of what they can do for us without any sense of reciprocating and not making it in a kind of an appropriate relationship. So I think we can always take some of these and expand them out into other circles of our lives and see how we follow our desires frequently and our attachment to things. And in the process, we might harm others directly, indirectly. We just have to be, again, very careful. Let's go back to the slides and just see attachment being great. Okay, let's go to this verse, verse 82. Due to being fickle. We had a verse about being fickle earlier on, remember, in the first part where we were dealing with that karma of having fickleness with friendships. We turn our backs on former companions. This is kind of showing, again, we do have that behavior sometimes where we just are constantly looking for the people who are most influential, who can help us, and we leave behind people once they've lost their usefulness. Due to our new friendships being great, we make entertaining talk to all. When we do see somebody new in our lives who maybe can do some wonderful things for us, then we put on the kind of the sparkling repartee, and start talking to them and making it seem like we're a wonderful person for them to have as friends, right? We become very caught up in, trying to make sure we have the right circle of people around us, abandon those who are maybe not living up to what we like in our lives, and then keep finding those that we can adopt that will actually be complementary to what we're seeking and satisfying our own self-cherishing mind, right? Pretty horrible ways of behaving, right? But perhaps we've done it, maybe not in really extreme ways, but there may be people that we've sort of left aside, left by the wayside as we've gone about living our lives that actually could have been very good friends to us if we had the proper attention paid to them. Let's go to the commentary on that. Someone who was previously close to our heart is considered to be a companion when later on that person changes slightly. For instance, his status becomes lower, or when the misery of suffering arises for him. We are fickle in that we turn our back on this former companion without benefiting him even slightly. So this is whatever factors change, whether it be that they've kind of they're no longer say you wanted somebody who had this position at a particular employer that you were looking to eventually get into, and then they were demoted, and suddenly they're not in such a good position to help you anymore. So it's like you lose your friendship with them. I think that's the idea being discussed here with Geshe-la. But anytime that anyone who's been our friend and companion that we turn away from them thinking, no, there's no real a need for me to continue to have that person in my life. And I can't even think about benefiting them anymore. They're no longer in my circle. That's not a good place to be. Again, that was verse A of that, or line A of that verse. Line B, that our new friendships are great, means that we immediately become friends and companions with others. That we make entertaining talk means that without actually benefiting others, we trick them verbally regarding the way in which we have food, wealth, enjoyments, and so forth. This being similar to what is meant in the world as a fast talker. I don't know, fast talkers, or somebody who, just kind of puts forward all of this kind of idea of who we are and kind of gives people a sort of impression based on the possessions we have, or the status we have, or the qualities that we have. It just talks about themselves constantly, trying to get other people to admire them. Perhaps we've done that to some degree. Again, it might not be in these really overt ways where you would cringe to see yourself doing that. But perhaps there are some subtle ways that we actually do try to draw people into our circle of friends who we know will satisfy our needs that are, again, simply arising from our own self-cherishing. Now, again, if we bring people into our lives in order to help with a Dharma project, for example, well, then it's a very different motivation, right? If we say, oh, this is somebody who I think would be really good to help us to, get more meditations at the center there, or whatever. Somebody who we think has some good abilities and skills that we'd like others to benefit from. Well, then it's a very different motivation, right? And this is where the self-cherishing mind is there and wanting what we want for ourselves, and using people, manipulating people, pushing these people out of our friendship circle, pulling these people in because of what our self-cherishing wants and thinks it can get from people. So again, this is a pretty horrible behavior, I think, to engage in when we see it in others. And we should then, when we see it in ourselves, kind of have the same response of wanting us to be free of that, wanting, again, to rant and rave on the heads of these twin demons that cause this. Verse 83, due to lacking clairvoyance, we eagerly lie and deprecate. So due to the fact that we don't have these particular skills, we nonetheless might lie and deprecate, lie to others, creating fictions about our skills and abilities and so on, or deprecate others, perhaps, who pretend, who kind of may put forth things that we want to call lies or whatever in others. So we might lie, but then we kind of accuse others of lying at the same time. Then line B, due to lacking compassion, we snatch away the heart of those with confidence in us. We kind of steal the heart of those who we don't have compassion for in the end. They've come into our circle and are very close to us. They might have some confidence in us, but we don't have the compassion for them that would really be ideal. So again, I don't think I have anything on this. As I said, I'm not having too many of those sorts of things to share. Oh, verse 84, I do have some. We'll come back to that for that verse. Let's go to verse 83, commentary from Geshe-la, for a little clearer meaning on this. So verse 83a, even though we do not have clairvoyance, when others request us to examine something and so forth, we tell lies by pretending to have it, right? So this is that false putting on airs, pretending to have abilities and skills that we actually lack. By the force of that, when later on the falsehood appears, we also have the need to eagerly deprecate others, saying, oh, but they're liars, they're lying about it. I actually do have these abilities, and I actually am telling the truth by, saying things that you come out of your supposed clairvoyance. Again, these are kind of hard for us to relate to, I think, because clairvoyances are not something that most people walk around with necessarily, or if they have them, perhaps they're hiding them well enough so that most people don't know about them. That's the ideal state of mind we want to have, is not advertise our spiritual abilities. But, I think anything where we have a particular skill or ability that we, are professing to have, in a greater capacity, or even something we don't have that we profess to have, whatever, that we should be very careful about that, not misleading people. And if people point out to us, well, when you were talking about emptiness the other day, you were making it sound like you had some great realization about that. Well, if someone points that out to you, don't say, well, but you're lying, and you don't know my realization. I could have. Rather say, yes, you're right. I don't have that realization, and I'm sorry if I misled you. I don't know. That's just one example. And we have to be real careful around any of these things that we call spiritual attainments. Clairvoyances are not something, again, most people are working around with, but perhaps we have our own little ways that we are measuring kind of the things we're able to say we have or we don't have around our Dharma knowledge, our Dharma practice, just to kind of keep those cards very close to your chest. Don't start, throwing them all out for everyone else to see. There's no real purpose for that. There might be a rare situation where somebody actually needs that information to help inspire them to gain some of these abilities. But I think it's best that we don't really, flout. Is that the right word? Flout, those sorts of things. I need my dictionary called back up in my head today, I think. So let's go on with the commentary. That was the first part. In addition, for line B, if we have compassion, we will never act to harm the minds of those people who have confidence in us, right? The people who've actually developed some respect for us, confidence in us, that they really trust us, why would we lose that compassion? Otherwise, Geshe-la says, whenever the slightest undesirable thing happens to us by the force of not having compassion, we will do some kind of harm to that person, whereby we will snatch their heart away. That is, we will make them very sad. So again, this might happen more frequently than the first one, where we actually have people who do trust us, who do have some confidence in us, and we need to make sure that we live up to that. These values, we have to value, again, those sorts of relationships. And if something goes south with them, we don't lose our compassion for those people. There are certainly situations where perhaps it's best to be physically distant from certain people because of behaviors they exhibit and so on that might be detrimental for them as well as for us or others. But that doesn't mean that we lose our compassion for them. It's one of the big things that's kind of the bottom line. We want to keep our compassion for all beings if possible. I know that's a tall order, but especially those beings who have some close connection to us, who've exhibited that confidence. Well, we don't want to ruin that. We don't want to do something to destroy that by being uncompassionate towards them. So is this the verse that, let me go up one here. This is this verse, 84, right? We're only at 83. So let's read it from here. Due to our hearing being paltry, we conjecture wildly about everything. This is the idea that maybe we don't have as much understanding as what we should ideally have to be able to talk about something. But somebody asks us to talk about it, we start conjecturing wildly about everything. I think we talked about something similar to this last week, where the idea was not to kind of make up things about something you don't know anything about, especially with the Dharma. We don't want to be conjecturing about what something is. If somebody asks us about emptiness and maybe we don't really have enough learning or understanding about emptiness, well, then don't start making things up, conjecturing. The second line, due to the extent of our scriptural knowledge being negligible, we develop wrong views regarding all. This is the ability that we have to develop kind of a false ways of looking at the Dharma because we haven't done the requisite kind of scriptural study in order to be able to really speak knowledgeably about things. So here, let's go to Geshe-la's commentary and then we'll come back to what Venerable Chodron says. I mean, one of the problems here with this verse 84 is that, of course, we need to make sure that especially people who are new to the Dharma get the teachings as accurately as possible. She said, as we mentioned before, when we listen to the scriptural systems, reflect on them and so on, we should develop joyous effort without coming under the power of idleness and the like. Then, if our hearing becomes vast, when we give explanation to others, we will be able to teach them, saying the meaning of this is that, without the need to make guesses, without to say, well, it could be this, and I think it's that. If people start saying that, then that's not actually conveying the Dharma correctly. On the other hand, the opposite to that, which is what we're talking about in that line A, is when we hear and reflect, we do not come to a precise and decisive conclusion, just a shaky one that isn't really stable, due to, for instance, not refuting our parents, teachers, and so forth face to face. Due to, that's a weird phrase, due to not refuting our parents, teachers, and so forth face to face. I'm not sure that I'm reading it correctly, but the opposite of that is when we hear and reflect and we don't come to a precise and decisive conclusion. Anyway, the idea is here is that we are actually kind of going astray and not really getting to the conclusions that the Dharma is driving us towards. And then it says in the next sentence, by the force of that, when due to it being our turn, it becomes necessary to give an explanation to others and so forth, we will end up conjecturing wildly. That is, we will make guesses about everything, saying this and that are similar, or the meaning of emptiness is blah, 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 when we really don't know it from our own hearing and understanding. Then, if the need for us to make a speech arises, the wise will be embarrassed. A teacher hearing us would be like, oh my gosh, what are you saying? That's not what I said at all. That's not the real Dharma. This is actually one reason why I really do like the idea, what we've been incorporating here, of having discussion, because when people actually do start talking about what they heard, then other people, if they're attentive, can maybe sometimes point out, well, I didn't hear it quite that way. What I heard was this, and then people can kind of correct, some of their ways of talking about things that, again, are coming from their own filter, their own, kind of what's going on for them that causes them to see emptiness in a particular vein or whatever the case might be. Yeah, we shouldn't be guessing and conjecturing about certain things that we haven't really studied well. What Venerable Chodron points out to some extent, and I don't think it's actually in the slides that I'm going to share with you, but she said what was amazing for her when she first started studying the Dharma was that all the teachers that she went to were pretty much saying the same thing. That's kind of a vote of confidence, if you will. If you have some teacher that kind of starts talking about in some weird way other teachings that are conjectures at what the Buddha meant by this or that, or whatever various things are, well, then it'll stand out because you'll have all these other teachers saying it's this, but then that one teacher saying it's something else. But she said that this actually gave her great confidence. And she was pointing it out, as I mentioned earlier, particularly with regard to new students. When we have new people coming to the Dharma, and people might bring in their own sort of baggage and questions and things from other traditions or things that they've read or studied that may be really, out in left field. Well, it's important that we don't kind of keep buying into what they're saying and even trying to conjecture about the meaning of Dharma being what they're talking about. Rather, we give the party line. We say the way in which it is presented to us through our teachers that we then can convey to other people, and not always be trying to appease others through providing them with something that fits into their view of things. Rather, we have to make sure that we're giving the straight talk of the Dharma and the medicine as it's meant to be administered. The next one that has to do with line B, in addition, due to the extent of our scriptural knowledge being negligible, that is, due to not having listened to and reflected on the scriptural systems well, we will develop wrong views regarding existence, thinking that is illogical. It is also not explained in any scripture. So if we might start, again, doing a form of deprecation, saying, well, but that's not what the Buddha said. That's not in the Heart Sutra. That's not in the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, whatever, some sutras that we maybe haven't studied. Well, until you've studied them, don't start saying that things aren't in the scripture, that things aren't there. Now, again, can we possibly know everything that is in all the scriptures of the Buddha? Most of the sutras of the Buddha, well, I guess the Pali Canon is pretty well translated now due to the kindness of Bhikkhu Bodhi and his whole series that he's done on translating these amazing teachings of the Buddha that were transmitted into the Pali language. But the Sanskrit sutras, there are a lot of them that are not translated. And so how do we know that? Well, again, we have to listen to what our teachers are saying. And of course, we have to be very good about saying, I don't know, when somebody asks us something that we just would be making a guess. We'd be just kind of coming up with something that fits our own minds. And that's essentially what Venerable Choden talks about. When we don't know something, there's nothing wrong with saying so. I recall during a panel discussion in front of a huge audience with experts in the field, His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, "I don't know," when asked a question. The room actually fell silent. Whoops, sorry. Here was the chief expert who said he didn't know, right? If the Dalai Lama doesn't know, who else would know? And people were shocked. In my eyes, she says, that was an illustration of His Holiness's integrity. He cared more about others than about faking it to protect his reputation. To say, oh yeah, I can come up with an answer for that, when he would be purely speculating. Taking the time to be aware of what we know and do not know is important. A saying goes, when you know what you do not know, you are starting to become wise. This is actually one of our biggest antidotes to the prideful mind, the arrogant mind, is to recognize all that we do not know. There's a lot that the Buddha taught that we just don't have any knowledge of. And then she does talk a little bit about this, the new people thing. I guess I did include that in here. If we teach people who already know something and we say something incorrect, often they will wisely question us about it, right? Say, well, Don, what I heard you say was emptiness is blah, 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 blah. That's not exactly how I heard it from, Geshe Sherab or whatever. And then I'd go, well, please tell me what you heard and let's talk about it, right? It would be really good to learn if I am speaking something wrongly that other people say that's sounding incorrect. However, she says, if we are giving a talk to new people, they will take it as the truth, which can start them down a wrong path. And of course, it can be very hard to correct people, further down the road. If you start off with wrong teachings to begin with, she points out in her book that also they might start distrusting other people because maybe they really liked you as their first teacher, the first person who kind of brought them to Buddhism. And maybe you're not even a teacher in that role per se, but you're like somebody who they discussed Buddhism with them as a friend. And then they go to the teachings and they hear something very different from another teacher. And they go, well, that isn't what you said. So they must be wrong because I like you. You're my friend. You must be right. So we can end up with these sort of distortions to the Dharma. Why? Because of our self-cherishing mind, wanting people to think well of us, wanting people to think that we know it all, that we have all this knowledge at our fingertips. So again, we have to be careful how the self-cherishing mind is manifesting in that way. Let's go on now to verse 85. Due to cultivating attachment and hatred, we criticize everything on the other side. Again, these two, kind of the two others of the three poisons, ignorance being the deeper error, but attachment and hatred kind of rising, towards beings in particular, and other systems and things that we are attached to our own, and we have hatred or aversion towards others. And we end up criticizing everything that is not ours because of these two poles of attachment to what we believe and what we have, and aversion to anything that is different. Secondly, due to cultivating jealousy, we exaggerate about others and deprecate them. We exaggerate the faults that they might have, and we deprecate the qualities that they obviously do possess. Okay, so let's look at what Geshe-la says on this. Pretty straightforward, this one. By the force of cultivating attachment and hatred toward many beings, we become sectarian with regard to Sera, Drepung, the Gelug system, Nyingma, and so forth. So he's pointing out within the Tibetan thing how you can have like different monasteries. People are quite attached to the Sera J monastery, and then they have an aversion towards Drepung Losling or whatever, or the Gelug system that we might see as superior to the Nyingmas and the Kagyus and what have you. And then we praise our own side and criticize everything on the other side. And this happens not just with the Dharma, but with many other things in our lives. Political parties, for example. In addition, by the force of cultivating jealousy, when we see others' excellences, unable to bear it, we exaggerate, saying, they did that with respect to that which they did not do. And even though they have good qualities, we deprecate them, saying they do not have them, right? So we exaggerate their faults and we negate, deny their good qualities. Again, I don't think I need to say too much more about that. That's pretty straightforward. Let's go on to verse 86. We do not study yet despise the vast teachings. You know, we can have these attitudes towards the teachings, and yet we haven't really studied it. We haven't really, you know, done the work that we need to do and actually seize the benefit of the teachings. Secondly, we do not rely on a lama, yet denigrate the scriptures. We don't really take to heart the advice and the teachings, the scriptural conveyance of the Dharma to us from a teacher. You know, we think that somehow we can explain it ourselves, that we've got the ability to have some sort of wisdom that is independent. We denigrate what the scriptures are actually there for, which is to give us this wisdom, to help us to cultivate it. So let's look at line A. Elderly Dharma practitioners, Geshe-la says, who do not have any experience of studying, for instance, through not understanding the Dharma of the vast teachings, due to setting their mind single-pointedly on a little distorted Dharma practice, generate the mind that desires to despise it, thinking those teachings are not beneficial. Kind of a lot of words to get at this idea of, again, someone who thinks because they've got something, some morsel that they've really found some benefit to, that they are denigrating, putting down the vast teachings that the Buddha did give. Because the Buddha taught, again, for 45 years, a huge number of scriptures and many commentaries of the great Indian masters on those. There's so much that we need to study, so much scriptural knowledge, and it's all of benefit. Everything the Buddha taught is a benefit. Again, do as much study as we can. It's not to say we shouldn't also do practice, but we need to make sure we don't let some sort of bit of practice become our preoccupation and in some way denigrate the value of doing deeper study of scriptures and treatises and so on. Then line B, in addition, without definitely relying on a lama, through taking the fact that we have wisdom as a reason, we take it for granted that we do not need the commentaries, oral transmissions, and so forth regarding the Dharma of the vast teachings, and explain it by appraising ourselves, saying, I'm able to explain it with my own wisdom. You know, that somehow we think we've got greater knowledge than the Buddha and the teachings that the Buddha gave, and of course that our own lamas are giving on the basis of their study. This is to denigrate, Geshe-la says, the scriptures. Since that is never proper, it is necessary to consider the commentaries, the lineage of the oral transmissions, and so forth as very important. You know, it is important not to denigrate any of the elements of the Dharma, especially that our teachers are trying to convey to us out of genuine concern for our well-being. Let's go on to 87. Let me just check, though, on the slides. I think we've got a little more time before the discussion. Make sure I'm not skipping something I wanted to share. No. Okay, so let's go through 87 on the screen here. We do not explain the scriptural baskets, yet compile self-fabricated lies. This is, again, if we start making up the Dharma. We've alluded to this similar type of behavior earlier tonight and last week even, but we have to really explain what the Buddha taught if we're explaining anything to others. Again, whether we're a teacher or just a Dharma friend or someone who even is new to the Dharma or doesn't know the Dharma, we have to be very careful in not fabricating things that we're coming up with from our own imagination. Secondly, we are not adept in pure appearances, yet talk a lot of gibberish. You know, so pure appearances has a couple of different meanings. Venerable Chodron talks about it in the context of Tantra, but she says there's also ways, of course, that we can see that we want to have a pure motivation around others and always conveying the Dharma with genuine concern for their well-being. So let's go through what Geshe-la says on this. First, line 87a. When explaining the Dharma and so forth, it is also necessary to explain it without contradicting the scriptural baskets that were taught by the Buddha Bhagawan. The opposite to that is to explain it through compiling various self-fabricated lies, such as how it appeared in a vision or a dream, how it arose as a tertan under a rock. These are these things that, again, some people profess to have. And there are, Padmasambhava, Guru Padmasambhava did leave termas, you know, that were sort of hidden teachings in Tibet that were found. But some people may fabricate that, right? How, oh, I'm one of those tertans who found these termas who are, you know, conveying some secret teachings that Guru Rinpoche gave us all, you know. Or as letters in the sky, you know, having some sort of vision of seeing letters in the sky that are the teachings. You know, these days there being many who do this. Again, maybe people don't profess to have these various kinds of things, but they come up with their own Dharma. That is not what the Buddha taught. In addition, line B, by the force of not being adept in pure appearance, we often talk a lot of gibberish by simply insulting and repudiating others without explaining the meaning of the Dharma, which is purposeful, and so on. So again, our motivation with others should always be to hold them as the object of our compassion, our love, our wish for them to be benefited by whatever we do. And so don't talk a lot of gibberish to them and kind of insult them in a sense, have that genuine concern and behave accordingly. So to this, Venerable Chodron says in her commentary the following: in Tantra, pure perception is used there as a term, as what we cultivate to help us overcome our afflictions by seeing all the world around us through the lens of a pure land, a land of the Buddha that we are initiated into, that we are visualizing ourselves as, and we're visualizing others as beings within the mandala of that being. While it usually entails, she says, seeing ourselves and everything around us as pure, another way to apply this concept of pure perception is to practice looking at situations with wisdom and compassion, just as a deity would. Buddhas would look at things through that lens, right? In this case, we see the person who disturbs us or who's asking anything of us as a sentient being who simply wants to be happy. Instead of regarding someone else as hopeless, we contemplate their Buddha nature. We see that they do have the potential to attain Buddhahood too. They're kind of a work in progress. They might not be doing a lot of active work to move in the direction of Buddhahood at the moment, but they have the raw material from which Buddhahood can be developed. Rather than follow our self-grasping ignorance, we practice seeing ourselves and others as empty of inherent existence, just as a deity would, right? That they're not inherently blind to the Dharma, that they're not inherently being malevolent or whatever the case might be. Inherent existence, if it did exist, would mean that beings were totally like that all the time and never would change. But others can change. Okay, maybe I've got time for one more. Without condemning actions that are not Dharma, we set forth various repudiations to all the excellent explanations. Again, we have to be clear in being what is negative. We have to condemn and say this is not something to be engaged in. And we have to be supporting all of what we've received in terms of the sutras, the scriptures, the treatises, all the excellent explanations given by the Buddha and great Buddhist masters, and not repudiate that, not try to deny it in any way or denigrate it. So these are, again, very similar. Many of these verses are just working with the ways that our minds get kind of distorted out of our self-cherishing to have harmful relationships with the Dharma and the teachings. So Geshe-la says, if there's anything worthy of condemnation, it is the negative actions that do not accord with the Dharma, right? This is why the Buddha set out all that the Buddha did in terms of negative behavior and actions that are non-virtuous, is so that we would condemn them and we would stop engaging in them. In addition to not condemning them, however, we eagerly carry them out and disrespectfully set forth various repudiations to the excellent explanations of the wise who teach the intentions of the Buddha Bhagawan without mistake. So instead of kind of condemning these negative actions that the Dharma says we should avoid, we end up condemning or repudiating, trying to put down the excellent teachings that we've been given, and perhaps even the wise ones who've given us that teaching. But the main thing is that we are kind of treating the Dharma in the exact opposite way to how it is designed. It's designed to help us. It's not designed, to be repudiated, to be, we have to condemn what the Buddha said to condemn, not follow the actions that are going to lead to future suffering for ourselves and others, for example. Let me just make sure I don't have anything on that. Oh, I do have a little bit. This is what Venerable Chodron says about this. She says, in brief, this verse that I just read is about misplaced rejoicing. We talked about rejoicing earlier. Here we rejoice at destructive actions and we brush off Dharma teachings. If we notice ourselves doing this, we should stop and ask ourselves, I'm acting opposite to the teachings that I esteem. What is the issue that's actually troubling me? I think this is I included this because I really like this little investigation. If we start noticing that we are in any way kind of deprecating the Dharma, rejoicing in destructive actions, continuing to follow those negative pathways without any sort of conscience or regret, well, then what is it that's really troubling me? Why am I incapable? If I do esteem the Dharma, and I know we all do, right? Every one of us here listening to these teachings, we're here because we hold the Dharma in high esteem. Well, why aren't we acting in accord with that? Using introspective awareness to identify our fears, we can then ask ourselves, is that fear realistic? The Buddha gave teachings in order to liberate me, not to make me afraid or to control me. I must be misconstruing the teachings. What do they actually mean? So sometimes we may see that we've got some fears coming up of not wanting to change or afraid of some other aspects of the teachings. Well, the Buddha's teachings are really not, to make us completely afraid and drown in our fear or to control us. It's to liberate you. It's to give you everything you need to follow. It's just simply information. The Buddha's giving it with a compassionate mind, not with some ulterior motive of making our life miserable. So we have to be clued in. What do these teachings actually mean? How do I actually follow them? By doing this, she says, we will be able to dispel whatever affliction or wrong view is tormenting us. This is real Dharma practice. Tending to our minds is real Dharma practice, is actually what we are here to do in all of this. Everything we discussed in this course is all about that, right? So if we aren't taking that other step of kind of examining, well, when I start going astray, when I am not following the Dharma, I'm embracing my own destructive behavior. Why is that coming up? Why am I doing that? And if we don't do that deeper investigation, we just keep doing those things. And we don't really see that while we hold the Dharma in such high esteem, we are actually following a path that is contrary to the Dharma. All right. So there's some juicy ones in this. I do like this, even though there's a lot of repetition, it seems, or at least playing with similar ideas around our relationship to the Dharma teachings, people who are trying to help us. We do see that these patterns are going to be self-destructive. They're actually going to do the exact opposite that the Dharma is intending to do in terms of the effects on our own minds and our own well-being. So got about 3 minutes after. Again, I've been forgetting to do that. If you do need to take a little stretch or something, do that and then kind of join back in. But tonight for the questions, we did have one question from last week that is covered tonight. Oops, that's the other one. That's
76.
Yeah, okay, 76. Was it 76 A or B or both? Or
I
there
believe
it is. 76
Oh,
is
is it?
on the screen now here, 76A.
Okay.
So again, just that first line of verse 76. And then the other homework is the one for tonight. And I didn't cover 89 and 90, unfortunately. Didn't quite get to those last two verses. So you've got 3 questions to work with. But again, don't feel that you have to limit it just to those. If there are other juicy bits that somebody wants to talk about that were in tonight's teachings that kind of caused you to perk up your ears and go, I need to pay attention to that. Well, then bring that up and discuss that. Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to Bill. Thank you, Bill.
Hi.
And
So
I'll hang out in the background here.
so this first part is really about let me change my view here so I can see everyone. I guess folks that give us advice or point out things that we can do better for our own good. But we don't, sorry, my video is frozen. Can you guys still hear me? This is about, like I said, this is kind of like when we get, I wouldn't say it's called criticism. It's more like someone's trying to help us by pointing out something that we're not doing or not doing well. And we get mad about it. And the flip side of the verse is, the people that tell us what we want to hear. But this part of the verse is focused on that. So does that bring up anything for anybody? They want to talk about it? I feel like this applies to just about everybody sometimes. Come on, get up here and lay down. Lefty's being a pain in the butt. Okay, go up there. Go on. Go on.
I guess I had a comment. At least for me, I think this goes back to like when I was a kid, and when your parents are always telling you stuff, do this, do that. And I think that's what gets stimulated, a little bit when somebody says something to me. I feel like, okay, I'm grown. I can figure this out. I'm grown up now. Which is kind of, it's nice to be able to get past that. But I do know that kind of can flip on pretty easily.
I think about this a lot, just being a teacher. Just trying to think about the best ways to deliver information to people or to teach them without them getting upset, which is harder than you would think sometimes. But yeah, I just think it's interesting. It makes me, I've definitely have trouble with this one. I feel like I've gotten a little better with it, but I always have to kind of tell myself that, criticism's okay. Any other comments on this one?
I think you're right. I think how you say something is really important.
Yeah, but at the same time, I feel like it's just there's some people, and this is me sometimes, where it doesn't seem to matter how somebody says it. It's not well received. I just had an experience with this on the flip side of this the last couple of weeks with a friend of mine who I've been trying to teach something to. And yeah, I know that I'm also that way sometimes, where people are trying to give me some advice to help me, and I'm just like, shut up, and yeah, it can be frustrating for the person trying to help, for sure, which I think speaks a lot to like the patience that a good teacher has to have, especially like a spiritual teacher. Because they definitely see us not taking their advice a lot and then see us suffer because of it, and they're just telling us stuff to to help us. So anyway, I like this verse. It's a good one. The next one is 83b. I'm using my two translations here. This is 84b in this one. And this is the one where we don't have compassion for people, for our friends when they screw up, I think is the best way to say it. Let me look at the at this translation here. This one, due to lacking compassion, we snatch away the heart of those with confidence in us. And the other translation is, it's been helpful to me to kind of compare these. We have little compassion for those who are near us. Whenever they blunder, we are quick to lash out. This is a pretty interesting metaphor in our translation, that we snatch the heart of those with confidence in us. Trying to pick up Geshe laws here to see if I can stimulate. So he says, if we have compassion, we will never act to harm the minds of those people who have confidence in us. Otherwise, whenever the slightest undesirable thing happens to us, by the force of not having compassion, we will do some kind of harm to that person, whereby we will snatch his heart away. That is, we will make him sad.
The holidays coming up.
Oh, here, I'll just mute. I just have to mute myself.
Okay. I was just thinking.
Through my mic. How about that?
The holidays, it makes me feel like we have we have the least amount of patience for our family often when we get together. Like they do the littlest thing on and we can so easily lose our patience with their loved ones. That's what this verse reminded me of.
Did you guys catch that? Just with the holidays coming up. Colleen just said that we're really easy to lose our patience with our loved ones. Have a short fuse. Sometimes have the least amount of compassion, she said, for people who should be the closest to us. No, it's me too. That's why I don't go home for Thanksgiving. I'm keeping my hands and feet to myself. Keeping my mouth shut. All right. This one's kind of, does anybody have anything?
Yeah, this is Amata. Sorry, I kind of live outside in the dark, which is why you can't see me. But okay, guilty as charged now. And yeah, no, this is really deep. And as you said, that phraseology is really potent. And yeah, just owning that I struggle with that. I'd say particularly in the work capacity, like, basically managing people at my sanctuary. I can be, I'm more and more aware of it. I can be impatient, especially when I feel like, it's urgent information, like animals' lives are at risk or whatever. I really want to work on that. And I'm not sure if it was connected to this passage or another one, but that whole concept of, it really kind of is antithetical to our wish as a bodhisattva in training, to present like that to other people, because if they were to be in need of us, you know, they might not feel as able to approach us with that, as if hurting someone's heart is not bad enough. There's that too. So thanks.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one's a little more, I think, relatable for me. This next one, not so much really. But the next one, the whole verse is, we do not study, yet despise the vast teachings. We do not rely on a lama, yet denigrate the scriptures. And we're specifically looking at this idea of we do not rely on the lama, we denigrate the scriptures. So without definitely relying on a lama, through taking the fact that we have wisdom as a reason, we take it for granted that we do not need the commentaries, oral transmissions, and so forth regarding the Dharma of vast teachings, and explain it by praising ourselves, saying, I am able to explain it with my own wisdom. This is to denigrate the scriptures. Since that is never proper, it is necessary to consider the commentaries, the lineage of the oral transmissions, and so forth as very important. I guess the way Geshe-la puts it, I feel like it does apply a little bit more. I mean, when I first see this, I was saying to Colleen, I was like, it's really rare that I have like negative thoughts towards my lamas for their advice. Like I usually have negative thoughts towards myself because I'm not able to follow it. But it's rare that like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of something. I guess I can think of some times with Venerable Robina when she was like being really hard with me, where I was like, man, I wish she'd cut me a break. But I don't feel like at any point in time I was like, thought she was wrong. I guess is what I'm saying. It's like usually maybe I'm just blessed that way or whatever. But this kind of makes it a little different because I think we all have this tendency to be like, oh yeah, I can figure that out. I know what that means. Maybe not. How about like, does anybody have any time where they figured out after the fact that they had something totally wrong? Dharma or otherwise?
I think one experience that I've kind of had trouble dealing with is when somebody who doesn't know anything about Buddhism or the Dharma asks me about it. And I don't even know like where to start, I'm like, I usually try to give them a book or something.
That's a good thing to do if it's a good book.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just give them a book that was maybe helpful for me, Buddhism for beginners or, open heart, open mind or something like that. And another situation that's happened to a lay group, they don't have a lama or this, a lineage teacher. And one of the people in the group was telling everybody she was an arhat. And somebody asked me about that. I'm like, I'm pretty sure an arhat would never say that they were an arhat.
Not unless it would be of benefit to somebody.
Yeah. I don't even know if they do that really. But anyway, because I do know that sometimes I hear a teaching and I come away with an impression or feeling like I understand it. And then a year or two later, I'll hear it again. And I'm like, oh, that's what they meant. So
layers.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I like about the Buddhist teachings, though, is there's like different levels of complexity and within the same teaching, and you can kind of have different levels of understanding of it. I think this is more speaking to times when we're just like, we hear it once and we're just like, oh, I got it. That's kind of what this reminds me of, which I think is really easy to do from an academic standpoint, but putting the things into practice is a lot harder. I think when I was first started practicing and studying, I'd be like, oh yeah, I got it. That's simple, but like the more you study these things, you realize the harder they are, the more difficult it is to actually do. But yeah, this is a cool verse for that. I feel like there's just a lot of spiritual materialism in this part of this text. So a lot of this, like being really conscious um of our self-cherishing, and I think almost more for me um our self-grasping mind, and making sure we're paying attention to it, and not putting anything onto the teachings that isn't there, I guess. It's kind of how I think about it. Kind of putting your own spin on things. Let's see if we can get, what's this last one? I think it was, hang on, I got like 4 different apps going here. This one's 86B. Oh, did we just do that one? We just did that one. So I think we're outdone.
Okay,
I got us through.
yeah. There were some good points raised in the discussion. I got a chance to listen, I think, to all of it. It was quite good. There were a few points where I wanted to interject, but then I thought, oh, no, let the discussion go. Everyone kind of came to some nice conclusions. I want to reiterate one of the points, the point that Amata made when she was talking about how, like, yeah, we can have that kind of interaction that happens, but this big thing about when we behave in particular ways, and a lot of the ways that are being highlighted here, that we are creating obstacles when others seek benefit from us. I think that was a nice take on all of this as well. And as bodhisattvas, we always want to be open, to receiving requests from others. I think there was one teaching, I don't know if it was from the Dalai Lama or who, that said, like, the words that a bodhisattva most likes to hear is, I need some help. Somebody asking for help, asking for teachings, asking for whatever it is that they need. And that, to like a bodhisattva's heart, that is just the perfect music, right? To hear other people asking for assistance, for help. So I think we have to be mindful of that dimension to it as well, that when we behave in these particular ways, it doesn't just screw up the situation in the moment and cause a negative karma or an imprint in our own minds that causes us to be that way in the future. It's a real obstacle to our bodhisattva attitude, to us to be able to be of benefit to others. So during that, I also did happen to go back, because that one passage puzzled me a little bit. Let me put it on the screen. It had to do with the commentary on verse 84. And I went back to Geshe-la's commentary. When I studied this earlier today, for some reason, I didn't pick up on the wording of this. The wording is perfectly fine. It's just the meaning is not so clear. At least it wasn't so clear to me. So I went to his commentary. It's this, it says, on the other hand, about the 4th line down here, the opposite to that is, when we hear and reflect, we do not come to a precise and decisive conclusion. Just a shaky one. Remember, I talked about that. But then this part where it says, due to, for instance, not refuting our parents, teachers, and so forth face to face. What he meant by that, in terms of his commentary, he says, is that he says, for example, instead of studying, listening, and reflecting, we will say something like, oh, my parents said like this, my teacher said like that, I cannot refute them. In other words, it's a form of laziness, because we're not really taking the time to investigate the teachings that we're given. And we're just not refuting them. We're just putting forward the words that they say without the deeper understanding that we have from our own investigation. That's the concept behind it. I think that is an important thing that I just wasn't picking up when I studied earlier today. So I thought I would share that.
Yeah, and I was kind of guessing on the verse that says not to guess, which I thought was kind of funny. Once I realized I was doing it. But it also seemed to me that that's kind of what I meant by what it sounded like to me was, if we've done the investigation and we're stable, then, like, if we're challenged, even if it's just to test our understanding, we're firm in our conviction because we've done the work. And, that's kind of how I read it. Like, I was like,
yeah. No, that makes sense, again, because that's the whole goal. And teachers will say something, and not all teachers are perfect, and I know I make mistakes sometimes in the things I say and try to correct them at a later point when I've come to realize it. And sometimes I perhaps am not even realizing that I'm making mistakes. And so I think it's perfectly fine with the right intention to study and investigate and come to a conclusion about the meaning of it, and then perhaps to say, well, my teacher said it like this, but this is through my investigation, through my study, through my looking at the scriptures, this is how I'm discerning the meaning of that. But it's something that, again, you're not in any way denigrating that teacher. Teachers are often putting those things forward as ways to encourage you to look deeper, go deeper, find the real truth for yourself. Buddha Shakyamuni he was in a prior life. It was said that he was a student, and the one teacher was giving some advice that was totally contrary to the Dharma. And of course, because they all had this amazing reverence for the teacher, most of the students went out and did exactly what the teacher said, even though it was contrary to the Dharma. And of course, when the teacher saw, again, Buddha Shakyamuni in that prior life, and asked him, why aren't you out doing what everybody else is doing? That's what I told you all to do, right? And he says, oh, but what you said is not in accord with what you've taught and how, the ideals that we need to live by. So I'm not going to do it. And he says, oh, you're the only one that got the lesson right. So I don't know if our teachers teach us that way that often, but we should be using our own critical thinking and analysis to investigate what we're given, and not just have it be spoon fed to us, where we're just, oh, Don said it, therefore it's true. Geshe-la said it, therefore it's true. Take what they say as being truth, our teachers, especially those that we have a very close relationship to, but do your own investigation, debate it with others, talk about it, see if it holds water. Because again, this is what the Buddha even said about his teachings, right? You have to analyze it like a goldsmith analyzing gold ore to see if it's really gold. Is it really gold? And we have to do that investigation, or the teachings don't become ours. They're simply teachings we've taken in and put them into our minds at a very superficial level, and we've never really done the integration. So, any other comments or questions from discussion or anything else from tonight? Yeah, Amata,
Yeah.
please.
Hi, thank you, Don. So appreciative of those last comments, especially in like juxtaposition to the last question for the group discussion. Because was something that it's something I've been wanting to ask about. So without wanting to in any way second guess or disrespect the Dharma or lamas, but at the same time, in the spirit of what you're just talking about, a lot of times I struggle with some of like the patriarchal language. And so in my own head, I'll change things like, in doing prostrations, like instead of, bowing respectfully to the lions among men, in my head, I say the lions among humans. And those are important things to me, because that's how I can really own it and chew on it if it's in an accessible language to me. And it's, that's the one thing I kind of do it with, is like the, gender stuff. And, I would be very concerned. I've wanted to ask Rinpoche, who's teaching that Lama class I'm in, about doing that. But, I'm really concerned. There is such importance in respecting the integrity of the tradition, the lineage, the text. And I really see why that is. But there are things that in my heart, I need evolution to happen. So thank you. I'm asking a question somewhere in there.
Yeah. I picked up on it because I have the same concerns. I do find that in many modern translations that people do change things like sons of the conquerors for bodhisattvas to children of the conquerors to be more inclusive of whatever genders, people are professing to or adhering to. So I nonetheless, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, one of my gurus, a very dear teacher, obviously, of mine, and his commenting on when that sort of language was used in certain prayers, like the one of the 9 reliances on the Guru, the 9 ways of relying on the Guru. And it says about being like a son, a dutiful son, and da-da-da-da. He explains in kind of his way of looking at it, that it's always the son that kind of becomes the king. And so it's meant to be that sort of language. But that whole analogy is patriarchal. I mean, it comes from our culture that has embraced men being the rulers and the queen being somebody who is, I guess there are certainly queens in British history and what have you that were the main ruler. But this idea in India was very patriarchal. It was the sons that became the kings. And, there was never this idea of a queen that was having that level of authority. And so I think, again, you're not changing the meaning of the Dharma by doing that, in my estimation. And I think most of us would agree when you say, instead of, what was it about being of men rather than of men, of humans, supreme guide of humans, I don't think you're changing the meaning. I think you're actually enhancing the meaning for most of our modern culture that is wanting to embrace a more inclusive language in the Dharma. So if it were something, and I can't even think of an example where you would actually be changing the meaning by changing the pronoun or the noun that's being used to describe things, then I think you might have to examine it more closely. But in terms of just as being it more palatable, more presentable, more inclusive, more in line with our modern culture, I don't see the problem with it. Rinpoche might object and say otherwise, that his idea of calling it the sons of the conquerors was that the princes are the ones who become the kings. And so, yes, that's what happens in patriarchal societies, but that's not how we want to be kind of tied to that model as a way of looking at these analogies and these comparisons. So does that answer your question, Anamata? I hope it does.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes.
And I see the resistance in wanting to ask like a Geshe or somebody, or Rinpoche that was, teaching a course and maybe coming from that orientation and might have a harder time seeing even the need to raise the question. But I think in our culture, we do have to be concerned. I mentioned last week, I think, when I was talking about one of the verses, that I think there's nothing wrong with, when you're especially working with people who don't know the Dharma, to using terminology that's conducive to them, as opposed to, like the term karma. In society, we obviously use it in a very unique way sometimes, but that's not always the way it's meant in Buddhism. So even if you start using terms like that people may have heard, they will see it through the lens of the way our culture sees things. And so you have to be very careful about kind of finding the right terminology and things that will be inviting for people to hear, as opposed to the doors shut almost immediately. I mean, we've even had some issues. I remember when the center was here in Santa Fe down on Alameda, where some people would come in, and as soon as we took the prayer books out, they were like, prayer book, and they wanted to run out of the room screaming, because the concept of like a prayer book had brought back so many things around other spiritual traditions that they were involved in, that where the prayers and the way of presenting things perhaps was a real strong reaction of something negative. So I think we even have to be careful around, how we continue to keep this tradition very much in line with what has preceded, and keep the essence of it, while at the same time recognizing that Buddhism has changed in every culture that it went to. Right? I mean, Tibetan Buddhism looks very different from Zen Buddhism. You could just go to a Zen temple and go to a Tibetan Buddhist temple, and you'll see very huge differences, right? Those are the ways that Buddhism shaped itself around a particular culture. And to my mind, we haven't yet developed what we might call American Buddhism. We might have American Zen Buddhism that has become a little more Americanized or Westernized. And even in some branches of Tibetan Buddhism, things have become a little more Westernized. And I think FPMT, as it was founded by Lama Yeshe, I'm getting on a little soapbox here, sorry, I'm keeping people late. When it was founded by Lama Yeshe, he very much, I think, was that trajectory of making it ours, an American way of approaching Tibetan Buddhism that still kept the essence of what it is, but tailored it to this culture. That's why when he taught, he was talking about, using hippie language and using all the things that people could easily refer to. So again, just as a kind of, we'll stop talking, but that's the gist of it, is to try to find ways that the Dharma becomes very palatable, very approachable, and people actually hear what they need to, without some blocks being put up immediately because the language is misogynistic or patriarchal or whatever you want to call it. So All right, let's do our dedication prayers. And thank you, Bill, for leading the discussion. Appreciate that. Let me get those on the screen here. Okay, the dedication prayer that's on the screen. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. Then the prayers for our precious teachers, beginning with His Holiness's prayer. And as I always say, by reciting this verse, think that we're creating the causes for the good health, the long lives, and the fulfillment of the wishes of all of our precious gurus who are still with us here today. The wish-granting, wish-fulfilling jewel, source of every single benefit and happiness in this world, to the incomparably kind Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled. And then these verses to create the causes for Rinpoche to return swiftly so we can benefit from his guidance in this world. Peerless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable Venerable Guru, to you I make request. While striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and for mother living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss. Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels and the great waves of bodhicitta, the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. Lastly, we dedicate for all the beings that we're holding in our hearts, those that we know, such as friends, acquaintances, family members who are having a difficult time right now, as well as those who we think of in the world who are experiencing varieties of sufferings, such as the wars going on in our world and so on. Or even we can think about all of the turkeys who have lost their lives for the sake of a Thanksgiving holiday that's coming up. I mean, there are many different groups of beings that we can send this energy out to. Just send that positive energy out with the wish of giving it away completely, just again in the spirit of Tonglen, wanting that to become the cause to remove the suffering of all of these beings that we're holding in our hearts and to bring them to complete happiness and peace. And may this happen for all sentient beings through what we've done here tonight. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to teach on this text. I learned a lot from listening to all of you discuss it as well. So I appreciate everyone participating in that. And again, thanks, Bill and Colleen, for doing all the work you do to host this. And everyone have a very nice, safe, peaceful holiday. And I'll look forward to seeing you next Tuesday as we get into the last few classes of this course. So hang in there, everyone. Be well. Practice. Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're
See
very
you.
welcome.